My name is Reverend Simon Ruth DeVoyle. I'm an interfaith minister, and I'm delighted to be the bridge pastor here for this incredible community that gathers on Zoom. And I've got a call to worship for us that we can all say together, if you'd like to. I invite you to say with me, we've come to worship God, who loved us before we were yet born, who knows us even better than we know ourselves, whose presence never leaves us, and whose love for us never ceases. This is our God. Let's worship together. Invite us to pray. Great Spirit, you see us outside the concept of time, and this is good news, because you see us in a way that is more beautiful than how we can see ourselves. We know ourselves based on who we have been, but you see us from the perspective of who we are becoming. The image of you as a loving parent, a loving mother, is apt, because you witness all that grows within us and all that does not grow. May we know something of that way of seeing ourselves, so that no matter how young or old we are, we can continue to grow as your adult children, co-creating in and with you, living our lives to the fullest. Amen. Each one of us is a product of hours and hours of service, love, and care from parents to their children. Thousands and thousands of hours passed down through an ancestral lineage, right to my grandparents and to me. I'm absolutely amazed at the enormity and selflessness required of mature parenting. It's amazing that so many people sign up for this 20-plus year-long task. And the metaphor of a mother growing a baby from the goodness of her own form is extremely apt. Now, years ago, as a telephone counsellor, I noticed that I could hear when women were pregnant, because their organs were so squashed by the baby, a compacted torso, that you could hear the way that pregnant women breathed, restricting themselves in order to make a safe space, a life-giving environment for the next generation. Now, in my life, I have received an abundance of mothering care, hour upon hour, week upon year upon decade of loving care from many mother figures, including my very wonderful biological mother, Katrina. I want to thank my mothers for the gift of worth and nourishment that you grew in me. If you agree with this, please place your hands on your heart, and we will give thanks for the worth and nourishment that our mothers gave to us. We also acknowledge that our very body was given by the body of another. I want to honour the women who, for whatever reason, carry the incredible pain of having lost a baby, a child, an adult son, an adult daughter. There is no greater sorrow, and we honour you. And if you agree with me, please place your hands on your heart. We honour you, mothers and fathers who grieve. There is no greater sorrow. We acknowledge your pain. And we also pray for all those for who, whatever reason, perhaps because they are unable to conceive, for whom Mother's Day is painful. Spread wide the hem of your garment. Bring healing, bring peace. Now, there's many parts of my faith. Some of you sometimes ask me if I'm Catholic or where my faith comes from. It's a melting pot of lots of things. But the church that I was christened into was Episcopal Church. My parents, before they quit their faith, were Episcopalian. And after I left the Abbey and I was quite lost, I went back to live with my parents and ended up going to the church that I was christened in. And the Scottish Episcopal Church has a liturgy, a wee book, that I think came from 1981, I think was when it was from. It was an old book. And there was a line that would always jump off the liturgy to me. We love because God loved us first. There is no room for fear in love. We love because God loved us first. I'm fascinated by this. The role modelling of love that needs to happen for us to grow into our fullness. Love, which is the very building block of this sacred creation. Rumi describes it as the bridge that connects us to everything else. Love needs to be role modelled. And 6 months ago, I was listening to an audiobook by Father Thomas Keating. I don't know if you know him. He was an amazing guy. And it was an audiobook on centering prayer, which I'm very interested in. But much to my surprise, most of the time in the audiobook, he didn't talk about prayer at all. He instead focused on what comes up for us as humans that blocks our ability to commune in the sacred quiet. And Father Keating was talking about what he called the human condition. And he reframes original sin, which is not biblical, I have to say. He reframes original sin, and that he's trying to explain why we choose to maim, destroy, harm ourselves, one another, and this planet. And I remember him saying that one of the reasons for this is that we, when we're brought into form in our mother's womb, we are blueprinted to orientate and know love. We will do anything to aim towards it. It's like a beacon that drives all of us. But he says that if love is poorly role modelled with conditions and power plays, humans wrongly orientate to that false smaller love. Like this blueprint of love is in us, but it needs to be role modeled to make made active. I think he's onto something. And also I love that idea of why it is that people will orientate to a very conditional love if they haven't met an unconditional love and an outpouring free love, then they're not going to know how to aim towards it. And I really want to take a moment to honour those of you who did not receive compassionate, appropriate mothering that was your birthright. My sister's adopted. I have witnessed firsthand the pain of one struggling to make sense of the fact that that birthright was not given to her. But all is not lost. My sister is an amazing person and some of the most loving people I have met. I actually grew up with a role modelling of not good parenting at all. And I remember one of my best friends, I asked him, you know, you had this alcoholic mother that went to these awful men and brought unsafe men into your house. How did you become so loving? And he told me, I had a cat. When I was growing up, I had a cat that I was very close to. And I really want to acknowledge that we can learn about love from many, many capacities. However we learn it, there's a bedrock of safety, of trust, of love that humans need. We need this if we're to thrive. We need to be able to trust the stability of the force of gravity if we're going to walk. And we need to trust the force of love that is strong enough, the compassion, if we are to become loving in this world, which is not always kind and loving. I'm going to break for a second and we're going to go into song because Alana Lewandowski's got a lovely song. It's an Easter song. It's called The Heart of God Has Been Revealed. And I think it sings really beautifully of this role modelling of which I'm describing. Okay. The heart of God has been revealed. The heart of God has been revealed, to bring love, not hate, to pour out, not dominate. The heart of God has been revealed. The heart of God has been revealed. The heart of God has been revealed, to forgive, not blame, to make whole, not shame. The heart of God has been revealed. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The heart of God has been revealed. Once something is in the world, it's in the world. Once we know love, we never ever forget it. For about 3 years, I ministered to a group of families around Chimacum. Chimacum is a farming area on the Olympic Peninsula, and a woman called Christy Kisler, who is one of the key people behind Finn River Cider, if you've ever had that delicious cider or been to their very community-orientated cider house. Christy Kisler sat down next to me at a concert, in a house concert, and she said, we need an interfaith minister. And she basically set up for me to minister for these families. Now, I love kids, but I'm not a parent. And I know very little about their cognitive capacities, but I decided to jump in and tried all sorts of different ways to teach the kids what I know about this invisible world that we are all part of. And we were outnumbered. There were many more kids than adults, most of whom were little boys. And a lot of the parents parented in child-determined, child-self-actuated way, which was very different than I grew up. And one of the fathers, a good friend of mine called Leaf, he once called the group of children very feral, and I think they were delightful and a wee bit feral, and I loved them. So I needed to find creative ways of capturing their attention and drawing them in to participate. But where do you start? Where do you start talking about God with 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds? I learned very quickly that transferring sacred knowledge and abstract ideas about God without religion is extremely difficult. And these parents were spiritual but not remotely religious, and some of them had a bit of beef with Christianity. Is there any of you, I'm going to change my view over for a second, any of you been Sunday school or children's church teachers? If so, I honour you. Can you wave at me? Yes, I'm seeing a few of you waving. Well done, what an act of service that is. It is not easy to teach small children about God. At the end of the day, I learned that I could teach rules or I could teach awe. And the best way that I could teach prayer and the way I connect with Great Spirit was to model prayer and involve the children in ritual and prayer. The group had been going for about a year, and I hadn't broached the topic of Christianity with the kids yet, because I knew that a few of the parents it was difficult. But this wasn't about the parents, this was about the kids, and I needed to find a creative way of explaining who Jesus was, because Easter had just happened, and I wanted to talk about Easter. So the way that I did this was I found a nest. Now, it wasn't this nest, because this is a hummingbird nest that me and my wife found. The nest that I showed the children was a robin's nest, so it was a lot bigger. This has got a little green stone from Iona in it, this tiny little nest. The time that we'd gathered before with the families, I'd taken them into the forest where my sit spot was, because I wanted to show them how I sit quietly in the trees. And my sit spot was underneath an eagle nest. And I'd shown them the eagles on the nest. And here we are meeting the next time. And I held up the nest and I had chickens' eggs in it, which looked ridiculous because it was a robin's nest. But I explained to the children, there's a way of being in the world that can help create a nest for each other. There are things that we can say and do through our actions that can help people grow, that can create safety and make people feel loved. And I said that each of the eggs is precious and it needs help to grow into its own individual personality. Now the children really liked this. There was a lot of times that my children's church was not so successful, but the nest went down really well because they understood. They understood that they had the safety of a home and that sometimes the outside world was cold or wild or scary. And that when that happens, they would feel shut down. And I explained Jesus as someone who knew how to make his world be like this nest. I explained that he was really important. He was so important that we changed the calendars to start at the time that he was born, and that each year Christmas comes around and people celebrate the fact that he was born. And I explained that the way that he lived his life and behaved created a safe, loving environment for others where they could be themselves, be healthier, be kinder, be fairer. Now, to my delight, some of the boys took on this idea of the nest and they became guardians of birds. And they did whatever they could to protect the birds in their neighborhood. And I remember one time we were having a barbecue at my house and I was out the back, I don't know what I was doing, and the kids came up and they were like, "Simon, do you have any worms?" And I was like, "Worms?" They're like, "Yes, we want some worms." So I went and I found them some worms, and it was about half an hour later that I realised that the robin was sitting looking perturbed because there were wee boys who'd climbed up in the tree and were feeding worms to baby robin chicks. And I loved the way that they interpreted the story of the nest here. Maybe it's not too great a leap for you to understand why I'm sharing this story about creating a nest on Mothering Sunday. Mothering the creatures and the people and the beings around us as best that we can. If small children can do it, we can do it. Yesterday, I went to look at a house. We were trying to buy a house, right? And this house had tenants in it. And when I was walking around it, it really showed me what the absence of the mother looks like very visually. Right? So when you're house hunting and you go around a house with tenants, I always feel really torn, and I like to say a blessing. I want to hide little things for the tenants because I know that there's nothing worse than being a tenant and the house is being sold from under you. And in this house, it was obviously the property of a single parent, probably a single dad. The serious absence of homeliness or child-centeredness or the mothering details in the fabric of the house. Now, it might have belonged to a single mum who was into cars and guns and hunting and motorbikes, but I think it was probably the house of a single dad. There was no space that had been made beautiful or nurturing. It was a rundown old farmhouse with sprawling barns on an exquisite hill. The land felt very sacred to me, and there was 2 heavy horses in the field next to us. And the house reminded me of what Christianity is like when there's an absence of the sacred feminine, when Mother God is not invited in. Functional, functioning, but not something that is drawing people in. There was nowhere in the house to rest or hang out. It was ideal for working on cars or cooking a meal or watching the 8-foot TV. But there was nothing cozy, and in the yard there was apple trees and a porch, but there was nowhere to sit. This home was set up for human doings and not human beings. It was not nurturing. And there was no detail to being. Like, for example, in the children's room, the curtain couldn't be opened. And the only art on the wall were 2 giant hunting trophies. And they happened to be the 2 animals I pray with every day, bear and deer. They were giant and I could touch them. And I wasn't distressed by this because almost every house we look at in rural Vermont has animal hunted parts. And I know that this is food as well as sport. So I am not gonna, I wasn't horrified or judgy of it. It was just strange. So as we were driving away, my wife didn't like this house at all, by the way. As we were driving away, I thought about how lucky I am to share a home with her, with Lyndon. And I gave so much thanks for the presence of the sacred feminine in my life, in my home, in my heart, in my faith. So much of what makes my life safe and cozy comes from the women and the gentle men that I love and know in my life. I have to include my father. My father is much more gentle than my mother. He's a very mothering man. I think it's this loving, parenting, kind, unconditional influence that helps us hold the light in our own heart. And the light that we hold in our own hearts is the only thing that remains after we're gone. Richard Brendan says this quote. I've actually got it for you. It's very short. The world doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be loved. And that is how you save it. The world doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be loved. And that is how you save it. I'm going to close with one last story. One of the teens that I work with, transgender teens, because I mentor some transgender teens, told me that I was a grandpa. That there was no way getting around it. Everything about me was a grandpa. From the things I say to the clothes I wear and my glasses, that I was a grandpa. I talked about this with my nephew and niece and they wholeheartedly agreed. And my whole family were listening. So my family decided to call me Lesbian Grandpa in honor of the fact that I used to be a lesbian and I still have a lot of lesbian traits. And I was delighted. Because I'm not a biological parent. But this loving parental face of God is one that I want to reflect out and pour from my heart to the earth around me. You parents and grandparents, I honor you. Thank you for listening.